broader audience to understand, there's a narrative that the scope of the plan on December 7th was just military objectives, and anything else that happened were um, various other groups that maybe went rogue. So I think it was very important that you added that to the thread, and that's a very important aspect of the video that you saw in regards to indicating that if it wasn't a part of the plan, they were happy to see it evolve into that at the very least. And then just a simple question: how important do you think it is, or do you think it's actually going to become something that the broader public is going to be able to see? And do you think that's obviously important for an option at least? Because there's obviously going to be a significant portion of people that don't want to see it, which is completely understandable. But I do think it's important to be out there for the audience or for the public to see as well. Thank you.
Excellent. You just reminded me of something. My previous statement I'm going to amend because there was one outside order that was captured on the film, so I'll hit that in a second. The discussion points while we were there with the embassy staff, with the ambassador and whatnot, it's Chatham House rules at the Atlantic Council, so there's non-attribution for any of that kind of stuff. And the Atlantic Council, we also don't have a House position on anything. We have members of the staff, who are more one way or another in any given international crisis that's going on. And as long as there's logic behind what it is that somebody's writing, you're able to stand behind your position, and those positions belong to the individual. So that's for that reason it's fairly neutral compared to a lot of think tanks in Washington. So just want to make sure that that's clear. So I'm not there is no House ideological position. It's what are the facts, then you have the ability to go from there and kind of present your arguments. The one instruction that did come was they were talking about, dead soldiers that they had killed, right? There was one guy that was in a tank they pulled out from there, and there was, I think, a couple others. And the instructions that were coming back on the radio were bring him back, bring it back. I forget it was him or it, and hang it in X square. So they were talking about bringing bodies somewhere to hang them in public for a public viewing. And the name that came up, I don't know, it was Al something. It was an Arabic name. That's what they were told basically by whoever was giving them orders on the radio coming back from Gaza. That is the only order that I heard come from Gaza, directing action to the folks on the ground. That's captured on the film that I saw.
John, you have to watch that as soon as it gets up.
I have my triggers, so
I know.
Yeah, the children, as a parent, I if I was given the opportunity, of course I would, just to be able to have that level.
Yeah.
But I think it would make me more angry on Spaces when we hear these rape deniers and these October 7th deniers.
Yeah.
I get.
Are you going on the Mario Space 2, Don?
Between our little family here, I asked if our friend Mr. Hinkle would be there or not. And right now, I won't. I won't.
I don't do Space with him either. I refuse
to be anywhere, even listening to Space. So no. So as of right now, I will be there. Yes.
He's not. Based on what I got, because I asked the question, based on what I got as an answer, he won't be in the first part.
May I ask a quick question, Iris?
He might be in the second because I will join.
What time is it Israeli? Does anybody know what time it is my time? Probably night time.
It's 2 hours. It's an hour 30.
About 90 minutes from now, I think.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, great.
So, Iris, do you mind if I ask a question?
Go.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So, Alex, I am sorry that you had to, watch this, and I'm sorry that this is just a disaster. I mean, I watched. The first thing I watched that was horrible like that was, I think, Zarqawi was beheading someone, and I had a problem for at least 2 months, like a severe problem. So, I mean, I can only imagine. But my question to you is, if the same situation happened in the West Bank, meaning they got a chance to get out and do what they please, do you see them having the same level of brutality and the same level of, animal behavior as what you saw, or it would be different in your opinion?
You mean who, the residents of the West Bank?
I mean, let's say there's another armed group there, whoever's, is Hamas fundamentally different than other militant groups that you ever saw, or it's just another?
Yes.
Okay. And why do you think so?
Sure, I think they were different for a couple of reasons, and I hit it a little earlier on the videos. Like, look, people will talk about terrorism in an inappropriate context on a regular basis. First of all, just in terms of standard definition, if we haven't been in a space together, the definition I use, which is a pretty commonly accepted one, is basically politically motivated violence against civilians, where you are using violence as a means to terrorize civilians to try to force a policy outcome that you're looking for. In this particular case, would be the establishment of a Palestinian state, right? And Hamas has chosen to use terrorism as a tactic in pursuit of that objective. There are other Palestinian groups who are seeking statehood who do not use that type of violence as a means to try to achieve their ends. That is not a universal across the board accepted practice. So no, not every group will use terrorism to do that, right? In this particular, and even if you do conduct terrorism, we've seen the attacks, right? Like they've gone after and shot random adults while they're out, or they've tried to stab soldiers or police officers. And if we're really splitting hairs, right? If you are an insurgency, right? Come think about it. You're basically trying to overthrow the sitting government that you have there, and if you choose to terrorize people to try to achieve your objectives, then it's a terrorist insurgency. But if you're attacking, soldiers and police officers only and everything else, and when I say only, I mean because it's not civilians, women, civilian men and kids, then that's not necessarily accepted. Right? Nobody wants to see any violence. But if you're going to wage war on a state, it's the state that you're going to go after, not the innocent civilians. That's terrorism. So we have seen distinctions between the groups. But again, I think the biggest piece for me is not just for that from a tactic standpoint in terms of what they did, but it was the enjoyment. Like, I've just never seen that before in any of the videos where they really took pleasure in what the hell it was they were doing and showed zero remorse or guilt afterwards. And they didn't come, and again, that's the other thing too. There's not a single time in the entire friggin' video where anybody's like, this is for Palestine, or this is so we can have a Palestinian state, or we're pissed off about the Al-Aqsa, mosque, that was entered on the Temple Mount. There were no political statements of any kind. None. It was just you Jew son of a bitch, you Jew
Yep.
dog, and murder and just hurting people. There was no stated political objective of any kind. Nowhere in that 45 minutes of strung together clips. It was just sheer, unadulterated violence meant to instill fear and hurt people and make sure they had painful deaths that wouldn't be forgotten.
It's a killing frenzy, basically.
It was a massacre. I mean, the word is
Massacre
often
completely.
it was a massacre. And I mean, when I looked at the whatchamacallit from the festival, that's where the most dead bodies were that I saw throughout the entire clip. I mean, it was a killing field. There were people all over the place. There was videos that were taken by victims from inside the porta potties, where they can see on the outside as people are shooting through each of the porta potties, trying to get to them, hiding in dumpsters, hiding inside, spaces that were there, and you could just see the sheer look of horror and terror on their faces as these people were happily dancing. I mean, and let's call it. Everybody's been to a music festival. Half the people, or however many people were out there, there was like a beer tent. Half the people probably had a couple of drinks or a little, what else was going on. And all of a sudden, in the middle of your day, you're partying and dancing outside, and people with machine guns show up, and they're just murdering people all over the place. The one thing that I didn't see in there, and rightfully so, as it was explained, was the sexual assaults and up close executions of any children. Those were taken out. There was one. I believe there was one of a super small child that was then taken out because the mother had asked that it be removed after changed her mind on the decision, because all of the families have to get permission for the video to go in there. My understanding is that the sexual assaults, some of them were captured on film, but they're not in the 45 to 47 minute video. So all I could say is I was told it's on. I was told that it exists, but I haven't seen it, because that question often comes up after yesterday, because we've heard a lot about the sexual assaults. There's plenty of evidence that it happened in terms of afterwards. Semen found on victims. Their pants pulled down, pelvises broken, sexually brutalized in feminine reproductive areas, and other parts of their body nearby. But I didn't see that on the tape yesterday, and was told it was not included for that reason, because they're not going to do that with sexual assault victims. So just want to make sure that's clear, because people ask.
That's insane. Really is.
Does this make you more angry when you see people try to say that Israel should stop the war, or that they should let Hamas be, or they shouldn't give Hamas what they want because Hamas wants war? Like, does this change your resolve in any way towards how you look at the war, Alex?
Not how I look at the war, because there are people who are unaware of what I just described. Even though it's floating on Telegram, they haven't really seen it, or they haven't internalized that those videos that that are floating around, that people are kind of proudly sharing here. There's little clips that, if you string them all together, tell a very nasty, ugly story about what happened. And whether that's because they don't want to believe it and it's confirmation bias, or because they choose to ignore it because the details, because they're proud of October 7th, but the details are what really bothers them. Well, if the details bother you, then you're not really proud. So nobody really wants to talk about that or admit it. So that's an issue with the folks who say things did or didn't happen, which is kind of ridiculous. Because again, it's most of this is Hamas's own videos, so they can deny it all they want. They just look like idiots in the end. But trying to get them to believe that sometimes is difficult. Where I was not on the fence, right? But if you were sitting there and you were saying, do you really spend the time? Do you really try to go kill every single Hamas fighter that's left that wants to fight? Or do you just go in and blow up the weapons and infrastructure and leave? What I saw on the video, it's just blatantly clear there is an indoctrination problem. These are folks who are not going to be reprogrammable. It's not possible. There is pure hatred, and they look at Jewish people and Israeli citizens as being less than human beings. And when you look at someone as less than a human being, that is the only way that you can engage in those acts of violence and still sleep at nighttime and not have it bother you. We saw that happen in Ukraine as well with the Russians and the way that they've treated them. And that's part of the danger of propaganda when you let that go unchecked. So there's an ideological component of this that does need to be addressed in the long term at some point. But in the interim, I'm looking at this now. It is very clear cut that the appropriate comparison for how this has to be fought is the counter ISIS campaign. You can't kill an ideology with bombs and bullets, but you sure as fuck can try to demilitarize those organizations and try to kill as many of the fighters or imprison them as possible. And then you're basically left continuously suppressing a threat afterwards. And there's a difference, right? Wanting an independent Palestinian state and saying I want it to be the 67 borders with East Jerusalem as a capital is not a terrorist statement. That's a policy objective that which people are seeking who want their own country. Whether you agree with it or not is a different story. Where it becomes a problem is when I say, hey, I'm willing to go strap explosives to myself or pick up machine guns, take a knife to go behead someone, throw grenades at small children, and go massacre 1,400 people in pursuit of those objectives. That is the terrorist portion of this that needs to be addressed. So that's not the Palestinian people. That's not people who support Palestinian statehood or a two-state solution or who are pushing for the 67 borders or East Jerusalem. Those are all perfectly fine things to have as discussion points and as policy objectives, and to try to find a way for groups of people to live in peace next to each other as neighbors, which hasn't happened in a long time. And what people around here will say, that's a long ways down the road based on what happened. Whether that is or that isn't is immaterial. The fact that you can have those discussions is fine, and that doesn't mean you have to go harm people who hold those views. But it's the people who choose to use terrorism in support of those policy objectives that have to be dealt with. And if you can have, an ability to sort of deal with the folks, reason with them, get them to see what they're doing is wrong, move them away from their position, and then get them to attempt to achieve their objectives through other means, great. But from what I saw on the tape, that's not possible. And if that's not possible and they're going to continue to have that mindset and that's how they see the world, they will take whatever opportunity they can the next time to conduct an attack like this. And we've already seen statements from Hamas leaders where they've said that October 7th was basically considered that just a practice. So they've basically already signaled that if given the opportunity, they're going to do this again. And if I'm the commander in chief in charge of the armed forces on the other side of the ocean right now, I am going to pursue them to the ends of the earth to make sure that that doesn't happen. And there is nothing that's going to stand in my way. And that is why the ceasefire is never going to be permanent until Hamas no longer exists.
Right.
Thank you very much, Alex. I appreciate you
Thank
coming in and
you.
talking with us.
Most welcome.
That
I
was
appreciate
really important, that everybody will hear. And while you were talking, I just like I recall everything. I saw the movie, and you saw things that I saw there, and it's yeah, it's very, very upsetting.
Iris, may I ask the final question real fast?
Yes, of course.
So, Alex, based on what you're describing, these seem to be people who are used to blood, or I mean, to get desensitized to this level. I mean, I don't know, maybe that they come that way. But do you believe that one, some of them came from outside, and they had like terrorist training before in Syria or so on? That's number one. Number two, or they were engaged in some acts inside Gaza, like somehow that killing maybe their own people or so on. Like, did these people sow blood before and had this experience where they kill others?
It's an excellent question. I mean, and the problem is, in order to tell you that whether they've seen combat, is that they'd have to have somebody that was shooting at them to see how they responded or how they operated in combat. It wasn't combat. The people they were fighting that are in the videos, they weren't fighting. They were executing civilians. They were unarmed. So, I mean, you don't, in terms of experience, there wasn't any wincing or anybody who looked squeamish or kind of held back. Like if they were going there to kill, they shot people. Or if somebody said, hey, go shoot that person, they turned around and they shot them, right? In terms of training, whether it was Syria or elsewhere, I don't know if there was external training or if they went elsewhere or whatever else. I mean, we know there are state sponsors who provide materials and support and training for them. For the individuals there, I can't answer that piece of it. What I can say is it's obvious from the tapes that there are some folks who were there who had military training of some sort, or paramilitary training, whatever you want to call it. They, their movements, the way they were, the discipline, the way they were holding their weapons, they were in uniforms, they were wearing tactical gear, moving towards targets in a way that you would expect from somebody who had very, basic amount of military training, which would also be consistent with the stories that we've heard that in the lead up to the attack, part of the reason it was kept quiet is that there were weekly or biweekly training sessions, like a Thursday, where people would show up for an hour or two to go drill with whatever they were doing, rifle training or movements or whatever it was, but then didn't know what the target was until the morning of the attack. So that would explain why some of them would have at least some form of training. But yes, there were others that were on there that it's hard to tell if they had training or not because they were just kind of casually strolling around with weapons and shooting people. But they also didn't really have to take up a tactical position because they didn't have any opposition to what they were doing. Everybody was unarmed that they were dealing with at that point. So
Were
it's
they
possible.
under the influence of Captagon, where where their bodies have any substances that
I don't know.
amphetamines or so on?
I mean, I didn't. From the behavior that I saw, everybody looked sober, and they looked sane to the extent that they didn't come across as having some sort of mental illness, like anything that was obviously manifested in their behavior or speech pattern, and they also didn't seem to be, slurring their words or anything like that, or like hopped up on something and crazy energy. I mean, it looked like what you would expect if somebody casually strolled around and just started murdering people. It's more akin to the videos of like school shooters than anything else. That if you've seen those in like on the U.S. side, where the people have gone in and just shot unarmed kids, and you look and they don't even give a shit. They just they kill and they keep moving. It's closer to that than anything else.
But yes, the answer is yes. It was found on them. They brought it with them, and they did have Captagon and a lot of it, as
Yeah,
far
but
as
the
I know.
Yeah,
question is, did they
entirely
use
possible.
it or not? It's possible, but did they use it or not? We're asking Alex
I,
if
I
it's visible.
so I didn't. So there's no footage of anybody like that looks like they're taking any drugs. I mean, one person or two people like take a drink of water or whatever else, but it looked like it was more, the drinking because they needed thirst. There was nothing where it showed them like putting pills or something like that in their mouth, and there was no behavior that I saw that showed that. But that's also just the 45 minutes of footage that I saw. There's 60 hours worth of tape, so I can't speak to what I didn't see. Pills were found on them, so I imagine that some folks took it.
Yeah.
But let's not forget, this video is only 10% of the people that were killed. There's another 1,000 people who were murdered in various circumstances by, and again, like the number of folks, I can't tell you how many Hamas fighters are in the video. Maybe a couple hundred altogether max, right? But there were 2,500 that showed up for the fight that day to 3,000. So I can only tell you maybe the 100 to 200 that I saw on the tape and what it is that they did. I can't tell you what the other 2,000 plus did or what else was found on them. But yes, I did hear that those drugs were found.
Can I ask one?
There are footage that is not in the video because it's not murder or anything, but there is some strange footage of them running crazy into a store and trying to steal whatever they can,
Gas
and
station, yeah.
things
Yep.
are very weird. They are like stealing the trash can or something that you cannot even explain. So it be might be an indication, but I don't know. I'm just saying that there is a lot of footage that is not just killing people, that is also a little bit bizarre from this day. So
Yeah, I've seen a lot of Twitter on Telegram. I've seen a lot of those. My question for Alex is specifically, let's say tomorrow this movie, this not movie, let's not say it movie, this
Footage.
yeah, footage of those like atrocities was put out. What do you think would be the reaction of the world? Would it help? Would it help? Would it keep it at status quo? So the people that are against it will find ways to say no, this is not what happened, blah blah. Or is it convincing enough to like push the public opinion? I don't want people to see it. It's horrible. I've seen a couple of those footages on Telegram. But what's your opinion on that specifically?
I can't tell you who I advocated to or what the response was because of the rules that were put in place for yesterday's session. But what I can tell you is that while I am, I'm Italian and Greek, was raised Catholic. My stepfather's Jewish. His father was the only survivor of the family from Auschwitz. The rest were all gassed to death. His mother was hidden in an attic in Holland. And so, talking to them, before they died about what it was like, one of the big things that came up with the camps was afterwards, the Allies brought all of the German, citizens who lived around the camps to come tour the place so they could see what happened with their own eyes, and that there would be living witnesses to what took place in addition to videotaping to give people evidence and an idea of what happened. But that was also in an era where news was trusted and people would take the footage and look at it and go, you can't make that up. That was also not a time where there was a lot of photo editing or video editing capabilities around for people to do that. I'm going to say this now because of the context of what's going on. If you look at the conflict that's going on in Ukraine, with obvious captured video of Russian atrocities and everything else, immediately get pushed back. Oh, this is fake news, or this is doctored, or this isn't real, or that's not right. It's like it's captured Russian GoPro camera. Like, what are you talking about? No, that's not true. So it's confirmation bias for some folks, right? So those people are not going to be moved no matter what's on the tape. Because there are people. I mean, look at the hospital strike, right? Even the day after the hospital strike happened, there's a 1 foot impact crater with a 25-meter radius blast pattern that's tight together next to itself when it hit the vehicles and then expanded outwards as it hit the hospital walls another 50 feet behind it, which tells you a couple clear things. It impacted the ground. It was small. It was a rocket because of the blast pattern and also how small the impact crater was. And the fire on the video was the 5 cars that are there that can be seen the next day. And then you've got the Hamas-run, Gaza Health Ministry coming and saying, "Oh, well, there's 500 people that died." You couldn't squeeze 500 people in that space physically if you tried. It's not possible, right? It didn't matter. The word was already out. It was a Israeli bomb that did it. It was all their fault. The entire region was up in protest. People were out on the streets, angry and everything that was going on, because it's what they were, preconditioned. They're pissed off and angry at the situation. They seized on that as a moment to say, "Hey, look what they're doing to our people." I saw what happened on October 7th, even though it wasn't said. I know it was bad, but look what they're doing too. It's them too. And it gave something to point at and hang on to. And it's manifestation of the anger, the deep-seated anger that's been there over the historic situation that precedes the incident going back to 1948. That's the reality of the situation that you have in the region. So I think to the extent that there's those folks who, you could literally sit there and they could, unless they were physically present for what took place, right, will never believe whatever happens. But I do think there's a decent amount of folks, who can be swayed if the video is released. And I certainly pushed for that for the same reason I just mentioned about how it happened after, the camps in World War II era Germany. People need to see what happened. It can't be forgotten about. And that's how we end up with Holocaust denial and all kinds of other bullshit because people were basically saying it didn't happen. It's on friggin' video. In this particular case, though, it's not the Allies marching people into a camp afterwards. It's not the Allies taking videotapes of the remains of the crematoriums and the bodies in the concentration camps. The footage was taken by Hamas. It's their own goddamn cameras. It's their GoPro footage, their cell phone videos, and they've already loaded it to Telegram. Like the vast majority of this was taken by the perpetrators. So when people sit there and say it didn't happen, it's like, what planet are you living on? And I think once they see everything all together, I think it'll be clear, what transpired to people who were watching it. The question becomes whether people are willing to make that jump and say, okay, I saw most of this on Telegram, it's real. I think what they'll immediately jump to is, hey, nothing's in the video that's got all the executions up close and personal of all the little kids that are there, right? Like anything that was with kids or whatever else is it's not up close and the faces are blurred. And then there's no video included in the footage compilation that includes sexual assaults. So I think actually what will end up happening in response to this, just seeing the information space, is people will see on the lack of sexual assault footage as part of the overall compilation and lack of like up close executions of kids. And they'll come back and they'll make stupid arguments that it was the Israelis who killed their own people and that the rapes didn't happen and therefore the whole thing is fake and none of this is real. That is where the people who refuse to accept reality will go with this, and they will ignore the factual footage that is in front of their faces. But those are the people who will stand by Hamas no matter what happened. That is also evident of a systemic indoctrination problem that goes beyond Hamas, which is even scarier when you think about it because it's not confined to that organization. There are people who ascribe to the things that they're saying.
You're going to deal with that in about an hour and a half on Mario.
Yeah, you're gonna have that in the space that you're gonna be in. I'm sure this is gonna come up,
That's
Alex.
okay.
I
You know,
I have to say you're amazing. I'm really, really Thank you so much for coming here and talking to us, and thank you for bringing this up. You don't know how much it means to me, and to others. I think that are really trying to bring the truth out there and make people understand. This is super important what you're doing, and yeah, I never saw you on X, but yeah, you seem like a great person, and definitely will send your bio to some of my journalists here in Israel, some of them that they'll know that you're here. And thank you so, so much.
You're welcome. Happy to. You haven't seen me on X, so be happy that your mental health is better for that. Previously,
I haven't been here for a long time. So yeah.
even better. So, as your response to the last thing I'll say is about the going into space in a little bit, and the the group of clamoring morons who are going to claim it didn't happen. George Carlin, back I think it was in the late '80s, had a comment that became famous, or a statement, right? Never underestimate the power of stupid people in large groups. He was talking about Twitter; it just hadn't existed yet.
So true.
Go ahead.
Yoda's there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I cut out for the last bit of what was being discussed, but really appreciate it. I also want to give a shout out to Alex, who's in the audience listening. No offense, John, but we've got another multifaceted expert as well. And if you haven't heard from Alex before, he's a great voice from Atlantic.
Alex is on stage, right, Piotr?
Is he? I can't see him on stage. Oh, okay.
Yes,
My
yes.
app has completely fucked over.
There's
He's
another
been
Alex
talking.
M. You think you mean right? The
Oh,
other
that
Alex?
was. Oh, okay. I missed that last bit. Sorry.
No,
He's
that
been
was
Wow,
talking
really
my app is
funny, Piotr.
fucked.
That was
Wow, my
really
app is
funny.
so fucked. Sorry, Alex.
You missed the
Um,
last hour.
no, I know. I
Yeah,
heard.
you
I heard
missed
most of
everything he
it.
said.
I thought it was
Every
another
bit
voice. I
of.
thought it was a voice similar to Alex's. This way, he's got a voice that reminds me of someone else I've listened to before. Never
Me or
mind.
the
I've
other
made a
Alex?
fool of myself. I'm going to go and bury my head in a hole.
Peter, do you mean me or the other Alex? That's odd.
Yeah, I just came here to complicate the situation.
No, Alex sounds like me. The other Alex, the IDF
No,
Alex,
I'm
sounds
not.
like me.
But
That's what people say,
if
Alex.
allowed to talk, please, if I can say a couple of things to Alex,
Go
if I
ahead.
may. And I'm not talking to myself, okay? Just for everybody to understand. First of all, Alex, I read your thread today, and it was amazing. Bookmark it for myself. Thank you for the words. It was very important. I actually read that to a couple of people as well, and it's great. Really loved it. Really detailed and really to the point. One thing that I did want to add to what you said in terms of military training, yes, there were some people military trained there, but most of the people were civilians with very, very little army training. And one thing that I can allude to is in that documentary about the women fighting the tank, the team that we discussed quite a couple of times this week. She actually speaks about her encounter as one of the tanks entered to one of the kibbutzes, and as long as soon as they saw the tank, they basically ran away. They didn't want to engage. They didn't want to combat. They just saw some armed resistance, and they just peeled off from there.
Yeah, first smart thing they did all day.
Yeah, and yeah, and again, thank you very much for what you did. That was amazing.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, at that point, I feel it's just an obligation to kind of document what I saw. I tried to keep personal opinion out, just some of it had to be an observation in terms of behavior, but as long as there was a description of the actions that I saw to justify the words that were used, I felt comfortable saying it. Um, and if you don't bear witness to what took place and make sure that it happens, the focus becomes on everything but the genesis for the event and the action we're seeing now. And the other comparison I think I made, not in the space, but just to give everybody some perspective on this, right? We need a permanent ceasefire. It needs to be a ceasefire now. Well, first of all, if there was a ceasefire that was just declared, right, everybody say, hey, we're going to do a permanent ceasefire. It's going to continue for the rest of the hostages. Look at what's happening today. There's rockets flying. There's gunfire. There's people fighting with internally inside Gaza. Hamas still has capabilities to function as an organization like that and conduct attacks. So a permanent ceasefire is simply not possible, and it's not. It is in the sense that it is not. It's not possible if you're still trying to demilitarize Hamas, which I believe is the goal, because Israel's never going to live with a threat like that on its border. So that's simply all kinds of nonsense from people that they think that this is somehow going to end and it's going to stop. And I mentioned it earlier in terms of people being asked to leave the battlefield and not displacing themselves and not leaving. Again, every single civilian casualty should be taken seriously. It should never be celebrated. It should be avoided at all costs. You don't leave the battlefield when people tell you to leave, and they're going to conduct operations there against a terrorist group that did that. There's going to be civilian casualties. And people say, well, it needs to stop. Let's have the ceasefire. Here's the analogy I'm going to give you. Could you imagine after 9/11, after conducting the attacks against the Twin Towers, and let's just say it was even more gruesome and there were fighters on the ground doing the things that I just described to you in the tape, who took, and that wouldn't be proportional, not 200, but like 2,000 New Yorkers hostage, and that Al Qaeda was in charge of Long Island, holding 2,000 Americans hostage while firing rockets at Manhattan, and then everybody's turning to the United States saying, we really should have a ceasefire, and you shouldn't be going after Al Qaeda on Long Island, because there are civilians that were being killed who refused to flee the battlefield. The collective response,
and proportionality also.
yeah, exactly, and the response from most of the New Yorkers, having been one at the time, would have been to go fuck yourself, because that's exactly what I would have said if I was them as well. That is what Israel is facing at this point. You can make a case for a two-state solution. You can make a case to support a Palestinian state and freedom and a democratic government and anything else related to that that is not incongruous, that is not mutually exclusive, right, or separate from getting rid of Hamas. Those can be two separate things. You can get rid of Hamas and demilitarize it and still support a two-state solution at some point for Palestinian people. That's what I believe. I do believe in a Palestinian state. I believe in one for the Palestinian people, and I believe that Hamas needs to go. You can say those two things at the same time. I also believe there's an obligation to try to minimize civilian casualties. That's also not out of line with everything that I've just said, right? What I don't agree with is allowing a capability or capacity for Hamas to continue to conduct attacks like that to happen again. No one in their right mind is going to live with that kind of bullshit on their borders. It's not going to happen. You have Israelis who still can't go back to their communities along the border with Gaza because it's not safe. And you've had tens of thousands that had to be evacuated in the north due to the threat from Hezbollah as well. That's not sustainable.
Go ahead. Who is next?
I think I
Let's go
was.
to.
I
Yeah,
just
go
had
ahead,
one
bro.
question. When you saw the footage, did it look like that they came over in waves? Like the first one was basically, you know, destroy mission, and then all of a sudden, they say that it was three waves, and the rest came over just, because people were like calling home or calling back to Gaza. Look what we're doing, and it's a free for all. And then they basically did even more harm, and then came to loot and steal and do whatever else.
So it's a great question. I heard the same things you did in terms of people tagging along who weren't actually part of Islamic Jihad or Hamas, who then took their own hostages and were committing crimes outside of that. Heard all the same things. That wasn't really visible in the tape. What we did see in terms of Gaza from the point of departure is that there was a very clear scene where the fence had already been cut. Basically, it looked like if you were to take like a screen for your like a screen door and have it the size of a garage door, and you took a razor blade and cut a hole in the screen the size of a garage door, that's essentially what it looked like they did to the fence in Gaza, but it wasn't screen. It was obviously metal fencing that was big enough for you to literally drive a truck through. And so there are images of the of pickup trucks leaving with people in the back of them, but it's groups of 10 to 20 who are operating as cells going to their individual locations. At no point was there anywhere that panned out that showed like a large wave of folks or alluded to the fact that there were multiple waves. That's not in the tape.
Thank you, and thank you again. I mean, literally, you really helped a lot with what you said. So I appreciate what you gave through. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
I can tell you a lot about this if you want. A lot about what we know
Go
from
ahead. Yeah.
how it was organized, the whole thing. Basically, we know already that all the five major militias in Gaza were involved. They were stupid enough to just leave the footage on the GoPros from before the attack on the GoPros when they died. So we just know it from there. Also, there were the plans and commands, and they just printed out a lot of information and took it with them. So it was found a lot of information about what are the commands and what exactly they were trying to do. Everything is just printed out, the whole thing. Moreover, from what we know, after everything started, the second wave, or the people that were not planned on the first place to come, there were people wandering around Gaza Street and offering people $100 bills if they go to Israel and quote, "Do whatever you want." So they just try to get to force to encourage as many people as possible, doesn't matter who, to just go to Israel. And one more thing, it's important to understand that the civilians armed with equipment are not just random civilians. They have small gangs in Gaza, and those small gangs just, I think this is something that I don't know, just I think took the opportunity and just came as a gang. This is why you see small groups of civilians that somehow also have equipment, but doesn't really look too organized, doing whatever they did. So yeah, this is what we know at the moment.
Yep, heard the same. I didn't want to dismiss it with what I was saying. It's more just it's not on the tape, so I just want to be very clear about what's on the tape and what's not. Because it was a saying this word just sounds so stupid or gross in context, but a privilege in the sense that it's limited to academics, think tanks, and journalists and politicians for right now, because folks are still in mourning. But having had or been afforded the opportunity to see it, I just want to make sure I'm careful in terms of articulating what it is that I saw versus didn't see, because otherwise there's no credibility to what I'm saying afterwards. So I just want to make sure that's understood, and that's why I'm making the very clear differentiation between what I saw and didn't see.
Great. Go ahead, Nog.
Wow.
I think Nog has a question. Go ahead, Nog.
I think the other gentleman or person, Dolphin, was before me. If they want to go ahead quickly.
All right, go ahead, Dolphin.
Sure. I'll just be very quick. First of all, I want to thank you guys for this space. This is my first time speaking here. I've been listening quite a few times. And I just want to express my appreciation for the space. It's so pleasant, polite, informative. The question I have is related to Alex's viewing of the film. The footage. Something that I read yesterday made me incredibly angry. The report that the person who will be investigating the sexual violence in the attack is going to be Navi Pillay, who is the UN person investigating Israel right now. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this. If my anger is misplaced, and actually even specifically because we have a lot of Israelis on this space here, is there any discussion or thoughts about this in Israel right now?
Well, you asked about it related to the video, so I'll answer quickly. I don't know the individual in question to have a personal opinion on that person in particular. What I can tell you from what I've seen outside of the video and heard is there should be sufficient forensic evidence to prove unequivocally that sexual assaults did take place. How many and all these other, I have no idea. And it's not something I was dig into it. I didn't see the footage, but it's not in the tape. And as it relates to like a war crimes investigation, I'd like to defer to John Spencer. He's better suited to talk about some of those issues.
John. Urban warfare.
Yes. Hope I don't glitch out on you. I'm driving, but listening. What was the specific question again on the? I know it's rape and war crimes.
Sexual assaults in the investigation, and the person who's doing the investigation, who's also investigating the UN. What did you say the name was, sir?
Navi Pillay. There's been a lot of criticism about her being of her anti-Israel bias in the past.
Yeah, but if you want it to be uncontestable, I mean, I know that there are many agencies and organizations on the ground assisting with forensics, and it will be, it's unfortunate you even have to talk about it, but it will be conclusive. But I'm all for all sides being allowed to see the truth for sure. I don't know the lady personally, but even if she has that past, I'm all for it. The more people that see the video, that see the evidence, that are part of the process with all dignity to the victims, I'm all for it. So that, and this is how you fight disinformation, is with truth, right? It's not some misquoted political person saying something, facts and evidence, right? In God I trust, all others bring data.
I'm with John on that one. And the one thing I want to raise related to that, because I think he brought up a good point. If you go back to when President Kennedy was killed in the United States and President Johnson was sworn in afterwards, he basically demanded, and there's private phone calls, you can hear it being screened, the Supreme Court justice, I don't know if it was the chief or one of the justices, and said, no, you're going to be on this damn thing and you're going to lead it. And the reason was because everybody knew that the Supreme Court justice didn't like President Kennedy and was a very conservative, had very different viewpoints than the president. And President Johnson's thought process there was, it will add some legitimacy than just a bunch of people who share the same viewpoint. So if there's a figure, provided that the investigation is done fairly, it may actually help add more credibility to it than not.
Although you can take that
But
Soleimani guy, yeah, there's limits to that, right? You can take that Soleimani guy and send him straight to hell.
Fair enough.
She has been involved. She made contribution to the 2001 Durban, I forgot what it was, conference on racism, which was in the middle of the first Intifada. And this was, so blatant anti-Israeli affair in the middle of a year in which hundreds of Israeli civilians were killed. And she played some role, I think even bigger one, in the Goldstone report, which claimed that Israel was doing war crimes in the 2000. Forgot the Goldstone report to which of the Gaza war it was attributed to. I think it was for the 2009,
2008.
the 2008. Thank you. That made all sorts of weird accusations that Israel was responsible because it was the occupying force, although we actually left Gaza 3 years before that, and we were no longer occupying Gaza. So, this is not the right person to investigate what happened. I don't trust her at all.
Yeah, but she's not the only person doing the investigation, right? So, uh,
She's the lead. She's the lead of the investigation. She's not on her own.
It doesn't matter. We cannot allow the UN to be part of what's going on here. That's really the biggest problem in this area. The UN, UNRWA, all those institutions which are somehow presumably in the US are thought of as a quote unquote neutral. They're not. We're seeing it again and again. I just watched a video from PBS in which somebody is saying their officials are saying that 5,300 kids lost their life in Gaza. What officials, and the interview was of somebody from UNESCO, what officials are saying this? It's Hamas officials. So Hamas is not a reliable source, and the UN that relies on Hamas is not a reliable source. I've only seen one photo of a mass grave of children coming out of Gaza, and eventually this photo apparently was taken in Syria. I don't trust none of the numbers that are being quoted all over the world, and I don't trust the UN officials that the ones that have I don't know if you've seen the interview on CNN with the CNN asking the UN Women Commission or something, and the person from the UN could not even say the word Hamas. Eventually they got them to say something about, okay, we need to investigate cases, but they didn't attribute it to anybody. We cannot trust those organizations. They really have no role, in my opinion, in the Middle East. The UN need to be replaced by something else if we want international involvement in the Middle East.
What's fun,
Sorry,
Ayala, about just Alex, 1 second. What's fun about you saying that if you look at the Palestinian side, they also hate the UN. So it is in accordance with what you're saying. Sorry, Alex.
They don't. I've spent a lot of time in the territories. Believe me, they are in love with the UN. There is something called OCHA, which coordinate all the UN activities in the area. I've spent numerous hours, hundreds if not hours, with the UN people in this area. I know what I'm talking about. They love to be in Israel. That's an important part of their career advancement to be stationed here. This is where they become famous, they become important. On the other hand, they live in great conditions of a Western country. Many of them told me, we love being in Israel. There are restaurants here. We can go to the beach. It's not like that, we have to deal with something in the middle of the Congo jungle that you need to take a truck ride on a Land Rover for 48 hours before you even get to the place that you need to investigate.
Yeah, I think if I was just going to respond to Al, there are just data driven, right? Just fact based discussion about the numbers coming out of Gaza. There's two instances of things that took place that have caused me to question the data that's coming out of there. First, I just spoke about was the hospital strike previously. And whether it was or it wasn't a rocket, which it obviously was afterwards, because the blast pattern and everything else was pretty clear, like what transpired. Plus, the entire scene was sanitized. There was no bomb fragments or rocket. There was nothing left. Why would you sanitize the scene? You'd be looking to show, hey, look, this is it was an Israeli bomb. It was gone, and the only people in charge of the area was Hamas. So it was pretty clear what happened afterwards, right? But let's just assume, just go with the fact that say it was an Israeli, bomb that was there. It's which it wasn't. There were no 500 casualties within like 15 minutes of the attack taking place. It was 3, 4, and then 500 casualties. I think with the Iranians at one point saying like 1,000, something ridiculous. All of a sudden, the light of day the next day, you got a 25 square meter blast area radius, that is, where you can't put 500 people. So you have a ministry that has clearly put out bullshit numbers in response to instances in the past. That's just one instance, though. Everybody makes a mistake, so you could say, okay, maybe that was some person jumping to things and confirmation bias, whatever. What are the numbers that have come out of there? I don't care what it is in terms of, for the purpose of this discussion I'm having right now, the point I'm going to make. 10, 15, 20,000, half of them are children. None of them are listed as Hamas fighters. So are you telling me that none of the people who were there, that Israel has not killed a single Hamas fighter, which is who they're fighting with? There's 40 dead Israeli soldiers who were obviously shot and killed or blown up by militants that they're engaging inside Gaza. And yet what we keep hearing from the health ministry is that they're all civilians. They're women and men, and 50% of them are kids. It is blatantly clear that the information being provided is not correct. Now, suggesting that there's no civilian casualties or anything else is complete horseshit. There obviously are. We're seeing images of it. The problem I have, and I don't have any faith in, are the numbers that are being provided, because I've seen multiple instances where it's clear that what is being said is not factually correct.
Yeah, I'm looking, for example, right now at in an article on the BBC website. Jabalia, Israel airstrike reportedly killed dozens at Gaza refugee camp. If you read this headline, and if it wasn't Israel and Gaza, this would be horrendous. Dozens killed in a refugee camp. Well, Jabalia is not a refugee camp. Jabalia is a town. What the photo show in this article from October 31st, it is taken from far and above. The photographer climbed another building in order to take a photo of this incident, and underneath this big crater of a huge bomb, people are taking bodies. And right now there is an article about this incident in the Wall Street Journal. It says Israel used a special bunker buster bombs specifically for that target. And I assume it is correct. There was a bunker underneath a huge building in the town of Jabalia, which is called refugee camp for historical reasons. And Israel took off, dismantled this whole building because underneath there was a bunker. And when they were taking out the bodies, they were very careful. I've seen it on live television from Al Jazeera. They were very careful to put them inside body bags so that nobody can really take a photo of it. Al Jazeera also put the camera way up high, far. Usually, how the media in Gaza like to take close-up of torn body parts. No, not this time. They put it, I don't know, 120 meters away. You couldn't see who is being pulled out. They were all adults. They were put in a body bag. You cannot see if they were, in uniform or not in uniform. There's no way to really tell if somebody is not Hamas if they don't wear a uniform. And then there are all those bodies put together in body bags, and you get this headline of dozens killed in a refugee camp. Well, the correct headline should have been Israel successfully hit the command and control center of Ahmed Randour, who is the military commander of northern Gaza, who was number three in Hamas chain of command. That was the target. That were all the people around him. There were no kids, no refugees. Give me a break. This whole thing is a complete charade, and the whole world is playing along with it.
Yeah, just share that Islamic Jihad just took responsibility for barrage of rockets towards Jerusalem. Just now. Yeah, we are in the Israel-Gaza war, so we
How did
need to
they how
know.
do they not frown upon sending rockets at Jerusalem, like even within the Palestinian cause?
Oh, yeah.
Like what if one of the rockets like inadvertently hit Al Aqsa? We know
Mhm.
they're shitty at aim.
Well, if that
No,
happened, it would be
we
Israel's
were
rocket.
joking. We were joking about this in the army because they were firing rockets and hitting the Palestinian Authority like all the way, two-way. Like they went too far and just hit the Palestinian Authority multiple times in the past wars. So we were joking about this. For, like, what the hell are you guys doing, hitting the
Yeah,
Palestinian Authority? Yeah.
we used to joke about the same thing in Iraq, and John will tell you the same thing. The safest place to be was inside the major palace or the embassy. The most dangerous place to be was a quarter to a half mile away because the rockets never actually hit their targets.
This is we were joking. I was at the West Bank, near pretty much where all the mess is now, near Offer prison, and we were joking that this is the safest place in the country because they don't it's the safest place in the country because we are at the Palestinian Authority, but we were wrong. Apparently, they do fire at the Palestinian Authority, but yeah, pretty much the same joke.
Alex, just to add on your reasons to be skeptical from the hospital bombing, the announced was 500. That 500 went into the total running Hamas Gaza Ministry of Health death toll. Was never revised down. In fact, they've never revised the death toll down, as Israel did, went from 1,400 to 1,200 when they discovered that 200 of the killed were Hamas fighters. Second, immediately after that hospital bombing, they had the doctor who's now arrested give a press conference where they rolled out bodies from the morgue and claimed they were casualties from the rocket attack. And then the third category of this is there's just so many videos that are clearly staged. There's one from this morning with a man with a microphone, attached to his lapel, holding a baby, which is obviously a doll, and claiming that his child was killed. And it's just there's so much just blatant propaganda. It's hard to know. I mean, it's hard to trust really anything.
I've searched and searched for photos coming out of Gaza of mass graves. I've constantly was on a lookout for such photos, and the first one that I found was eventually from Syria, and then the only one that actually was a real mass grave was the incident in which Israel dug out and took from the morgue bodies from Shifa Hospital to check if they are hostages. And once we have returned those bodies, that some of them were in graves that were built over a period of time, but we have returned all of them together from after checking those bodies. Uh, this was the only case in which you could see a tractor creating a mass grave in Gaza, and immediately, people like Suleiman put photos that shows Nazi shooting at Jews in the Holocaust and comparing it to that photo. Other than that, there were no incidents of mass grave photographs that I could see. I highly doubt all the numbers coming out of Gaza. Now, I've personally found out, since they release a list of names, I found out that there is one duplicate there from a list that they gave in 2014. So this poor person died died twice. Once when he was 23 years old, died at 2014, and then he died again when he is 33 years old, when he in 2023. And a friend helped me, and he said that he found another 47 such duplicates. uh, but nobody really analyzed those lists, very thoroughly as need to be done. And since the IDF know at many cases which are the specific target that they were intending to hit when they hit a certain building, they can see in the list who else was killed with him. The Palestinians themselves on that list said that there are 1,538 families in this list when it was about 8,000 people. So there are many places there where the IDF would do a directed, I don't know how it's called, specific target on a Hamas person that is with several other people of his family. And so that is, in those incidents, there are maybe 6 or 7 people killed. So if Israel took 1,000 Hamas people by that time, and with each of them there were 5 family members, and you cannot do knock on the roof or all sorts of other things because then he would escape. Then this explains almost all of the casualties. Now, I'm sure there were other casualties, but those numbers are not that high. In any place where we have destroyed a whole building, we evacuated the people beforehand, except for this one Jabalia case. That's why they made a headline out of it, presumably, calling it a refugee camp. It's a completely built out urban area. It's not a camp. It's really a town of Jabalia.
I just my opinion. I think the number is even higher than the one that's given by Gaza, but it doesn't matter. That's the difference. Like, as someone who is closer to the Palestinian side, and people tease me for that, but I'm closer to the Palestinian issue because of my origin, my Lebanese origin. It doesn't matter what happens in Gaza right now, in the sense of the deaths, the collateral deaths in a case like this have to happen. We need to learn to do it better. And I talked to John about it, and we had a discussion about it in the past. The deaths are inevitable. Like, the number in itself, I don't care if it's 30K, I don't care if it's 10K. People will die in conflicts like this. What needs to happen is a solution. We need to start not looking back at situations, exact situation. We need to start looking forward. Because every time we're rehashing the past, we're not moving forward, and that's what's hurting me. What's hurting me is that we will go through that cycle again. And if it doesn't happen in 2 years, it's going to happen in 10, it's going to happen in 15. That's what happened in Lebanon after 2006. And that's what's scaring me. That's what I'm fearing. Those people, something needs to happen. A way. This either need to go much faster or be more methodical. One of the two. That's what I wanted to bring to that point. And that's what's annoying me in a sense.
James Dale, the one thing I do want to say about the casualties too, because it comes up a lot in context. People throw words around which have legal meanings, but just from a practical perspective, let's go with Hamas's Gaza figures for right now, right, and say that there's 10,000, dead people at the time we were talking about it, 10, 15, or wherever they're at now. There's been about 10 to 15,000 bombs dropped. It's almost 1 to 1 in terms of a casualty and an ordnance and a bomb that's dropped or a missile or a rocket that's coming in that's being fired into Gaza. If you were conducting genocide where your job was to kill as many of a group or race or subgroup of people as possible because of some identity component of their makeup, right? Gender, religion, creed, ethnicity, whatever else, and you launched 10,000 missiles, bombs, and rockets, and your kill ratio is 1 person to 1 bomb or 1 rocket, that is not an effective ratio if that's what your mission is. So like the numbers literally don't support that statement.
Just on the subject of ordnance, I don't know if this was previously discussed. I had to hop off. The Wall Street Journal is now reporting that the U.S. has delivered 100 BLU-109 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs to Israel.
That would make sense because if you think about it, right, they haven't really entered the tunnel complexes a lot. And if the only people that are in the tunnel complexes are Hamas members and the hostages that are left, if you can get the remaining hostages out of the tunnel system, or if you can get confirmation that there's no people there, do you want to risk sending your folks down there? Or you just blow the damn tunnel system up. I mean, you can make an argument either way for intelligence gathering, this, that, the other thing. And all John's, this is John's area of expertise. My argument would be, if you don't need to go in there, then why do it? Fuck it, drop the bombs and just collapse the tunnel system. But the risk you run right now is that you don't have all the hostages out. That's at least how I'm looking at it. And John, I don't know if you see it differently.
I'm cleaning my car. So it's too distracting.
Alex, do you know if that specific type of ordnance is that sufficient to penetrate, reinforced concrete 50 meters deep?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know if that's what they would use. I'll ask John. Maybe John knows.
John?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
It's
we
not
can.
close
Barely.
either.
You sound
Where?
like you're in a train, not in the train
Yeah,
station, but
or
actually in the
you're
train.
washing something, John.
I
Uh,
suspect he's in a
What are
Hamas
you
tunnel.
washing?
hey, I can't say no to the space, so I have to clean my car and do
We can
things
hear you
like
now,
You're
that.
brother.
actually washing.
Yeah,
Me too, John.
Oh, that's amazing.
I turned off the vacuum. Yeah, I'm getting a couple
Oh,
of
okay.
I'm getting some media requests on this specific topic on the bunker buster and munition.
John, are you just
So
practicing? Are you practicing tunnel warfare right now? Is that what's going on?
I do know my cabin property. I'm getting some questions on this announcement, this media pig about the bunker buster munition, to include like, is it safe and all this, like, is a bomb safe? I mean, I don't understand what your question is. So I agree with Alex on, this is what you would need to destroy a military industrial underground complex, and especially in locations you don't need to exploit. You have enough intelligence to say that the risk is to contain an enemy in a certain area, to destroy a tunnel complex. I mean, the best bunker busting munition, from what in a general term, can penetrate about 20 inches of reinforced concrete and about 100 feet of basically burden or soil. So about 150 feet. Now, there's some. I mean, that's a general figure for the one they're talking about. There are like the Moab and other things, but no, really below 100 feet, you really, it's or 20 inches of concrete if it's a deep buried military industrial space, which is a level of underground, is that there is no buster munition that can go all the way down to like the 200-foot level, the 300-foot level.
John, can you hit it? Can you hit it with repeated bunker busters to get 20 inches, 20 inches, 20 inches?
So I'm not a weaponeer. Those are called weaponeers. I assume we have seen that where they'll drop one, wait a little bit longer. So you have to basically logically. I'm not an engineer, but an old infantryman. That, like, yes, you could increase if you continue, but there's a limit to it.
Did you say that the name of that is a weaponeer?
Yeah, weaponeers. They're targeting. There's people whose only job is just targeting and weaponeering. So as much as what fits on a plane, as much as what a munition can do within the Air Force and other, it's a specialty.
So I just looked back through my notes, and this is the specific type of ordnance that Israel has been requesting in case they need to attack Iran's buried nuclear facilities at Fordow, but it's been previously denied because of that specific purpose. So I guess they granted them, under this specific use case to bomb the tunnels. Obviously, they don't want them going after Iran with this.
Do you know which bomb exactly this time? Because
it's journals reporting BLU 109s.
Oh,
109.
I don't know, but
Yeah.
thank you for what you sent me before. That was very useful. Great.
There is a video from today from Han Yunis where you can see that there is a bomb being you cannot see the bomb. You'd see the first explosion, and then you would see along the street several hundred yards away, you'll see a something coming out of a shaft, and then another one, and another one, another one, and there are two options to interpret that. Either somebody serially was able to put a bomb in each shaft, or there is some kind of a wave traveling through the tunnel, and the smoke coming out at each shaft as it hits it. But you can clearly see the you can clearly envision this as a movement that is happening underground and bursting out of the ground each time it reaches to another shaft. And there is another similar in the same video, something that happens in the background similar to what I've said, and then from one of the shafts suddenly there is big explosion. So it looks like those bombs are doing their jobs, and I would guess they also hit a place where rockets were stored. I can find this video and place it.
So,
I did tweet.
so I want to jump in because I've got to go soon. So I want to ask Alex a bit of a question. You can take it back to the urban warfare and bunker busting, and John can go ape shit again. But Alex, good to see you. Quick question about what you saw. How much of that kind of footage do you think is being seen by other I don't know, people of influence, stakeholders like government officials, and not just in the US, but because I mean AC has a lot of people advising ministers and different members of Congress, I
Certainly.
suppose. So, what do you think about what could that influence other bodies, namely the US and others, towards how they support Israel? Is there anything in there that's we don't already know, or it's just it's so bad that it could elongate the support for the US to Israel, if you know what I mean?
No, excellent question. I mean, I think the overall footage put together provides context that the little clips don't. Like the little clips are savage enough. Like everybody's seen the clip. Has everybody seen the clip where there's a one of the I'm going to call him a Hamas member because I don't know. I assume that he is based in there, but it's one of the Palestinian men who is there, who I assume is a Hamas member, who's taken like a hoe, used for gardening, right? And that there's a deceased person on their back, and the guy is trying to decapitate them and take the hoe and smash it into the throat.
Yeah.
That's one of that's one of the scenes that's in the video. Everybody's seen that. It's on Telegram. It's out there, right? But it's that in itself is gross. But it's like a 10-second clip that's floating on the internet. There's a little bit more footage before and after that where the guy's like, give me that thing. You helped. I want to cut his head off. Give me that thing. Where they sit there and he can't do it, and he takes a good 20 swings and it doesn't work. Right. That in itself is gross. But that's just one action inside the kibbutzim where they're going in and they're going house to house and they're conducting these activities. What you're missing contextually when you see just that little clip is you're missing the rollout from Gaza, the showing up, the whole scene setting in the background that takes you to that moment and the sheer terror and horror of the people around who are still alive and killing that you don't get when you just watch the little clip. So I think that's the real impact of the movies. It tells the full story that the little clips don't. Um, and my understanding, and speaking to some folks, I mean, I was just speaking to folks from Ukraine. I know there was a screening at through the Israeli embassy in Kiev. So I think that the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs is basically responsible for helping to disseminate, or not disseminate because that would be out of their control, but to help provide screenings of the footage to folks, globally in different countries. And I think, that what they're trying to do, because I asked the same questions, like this should be more broadly released, let people take a look at it. I mean, there's still going to be the naysayers and the crazies that look at it, but they're, if you're batshit now, you're going to be batshit afterwards. It's not anything that's going to change. People are still in mourning. People's loved ones were brutally slaughtered and killed, and it's still fresh. So there may be people who will acquiesce and say, hey, it's important that this is seen by people, even though it's my loved one and I don't want to watch it, but go ahead and use that footage. So the tape, by the way, is continuously being updated. And by updated, I don't mean edited. I mean things are added or removed. And things are added when families give permission or people are identified, because they've got stuff that they would like to be able to add to show people. But if you can't identify who it is, then you can't get permission from a survivor or a family member to give permission to use that. Or in some cases, family members, change their mind afterwards, say, I want to take this out. So there's been, a couple things. Again, the one that was referenced, I recall, was a little kid that was executed, and that one was taken out because the mother subsequently decided that that was no longer something she was comfortable with in there. So I think it's going to continue to evolve, but if anything, it's going to get worse because there'll be more stuff that's added. What I don't know how to solve for are the crazy deniers of the things like sexual assaults or everything else because they just, they don't want to believe that their heroes are the scumbags that they actually are. And there's nothing I can do about that. Uh, I don't think that I'd be wanting to watch sexual assaults take place. And the fact that we even have to have that conversation that people, you know, when you've got broken, shattered pelvises, people with their pants pulled down to, or their underwear pulled down to their ankles, semen on on their bodies, clear signs of sexual trauma to their reproductive areas, and that's still not good enough, and you actually want to see it on tape. Those are not people that I take seriously who are ever really going to give a shit or actually care or believe what happened. Like, unless they were physically strapped to a chair and had their eyelids taped open and forced to watch it live, I don't see any other way that they would believe it. So I think
Right.
there has to be a line that Israel has to draw to where it feels comfortable with what it's willing to share. And then at that point, it's up to the civilized, decent world and people watching it to realize the reality that's in front of their faces and what that means in terms of allowing a group like Hamas to continue to exist.
And
And
I think it would be
just a
super quick.
couple of AB, so I just want to follow
Go
up on
ahead.
that.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Just two follow-ups then. So one, is this helping us to distinguish between different groups? Because one of the things I read is that Hamas sort of coordinated some I don't know, what do you want to call it, group attack, including PIJ and others. So can we see a distinction between PIJ members and Hamas? Could it help us identify them? Second, what do you think this does mean for Israel's subsequent operation? Is it going to be, full scale what we've seen before? Is it going to be sort of intermittent raids and sort of more specialist focused areas? Because the Americans maybe don't want them to do what they were doing before. Any thoughts?
excellent question. So the only things that I saw in terms of distinctions, you saw the traditional green Hamas headbands on some of the folks. You did see Palestinian flags on the center of like the plate carriers that people were wearing, whether there were plates inside or a different story, but it was at least a tactical vest. But there wasn't a very clear differentiation between PIJ or Hamas. The only other paraphernalia or whatever else that was visible in the video associated with any group was an Al Qaeda, or it's not Al Qaeda, was an ISIS flag that was present on one of the things that was there. But I don't necessarily know that it was ISIS, or I haven't heard any reports there were. But to the extent maybe that was influencing ideology or people who aspired to the group's ideology, who knows? So no, that part isn't really clear if there was multiple groups involved, or if there are, which we believe there were, exactly for the reasons you just said. It's at least not distinguishable in the film. Is one. Now, in terms of the second part of the fight, I actually am just waiting for the damn piece to get published now, but I wrote what it's going to look like. The second piece will be a ground campaign. They are going to have to go in on the ground into southern Gaza. There's no way you can still achieve those objectives from the air like we've been saying for weeks, but it will be different. They've proposed a humanitarian strip along the beach, which is not super big. You can't stick 2 million people in there, but at least it's some area of respite where they can go and disseminate humanitarian aid. I think the UN is still, I don't know where they're at with agreeing to that area, but regardless, I think we all had questions. Okay, what the hell do you do with the 2 million people in southern Gaza? That's twice the size of the normal population with infrastructure that was already, stressed and at capacity prior to the attacks, right? And then people moving south down there. And the response that I believe that the IDF spokesman gave the other night is that they intend to shuffle people around in southern Gaza to move them from place to place as they free up neighborhoods or areas where they're going to conduct operations. So I think the practical military impact of that is probably a limited use of air that they, where they had a much more broad use of that in the north, and it obviously will impact the ability to conduct ground operations when you've got limited air support that's there, which would increase the risk to ground forces. That's my
Alex,
take based on my experience. But I'll
Alex, I
leave
saw that the IDF kind of delineated a map with over 600 subdivisions, 600 plus in
yeah,
Gaza. I don't know if you saw that to sort of
Yeah,
move
there
people.
is a map that they published this morning. It's also in English, Alex, if you wanna.
yeah,
John has it. I sent it to John this
yes,
morning. So yeah.
Yeah, to be like much more tactical about like saying and much more specific to give warnings that hey,
yeah,
people in this neighborhood of whatever Zaytun, move from here to here, and not
yeah,
just generally northern Gaza to southern Gaza or whatever.
John,
yeah,
can
and
you
again,
talk to that for a second about that?
Yeah, I mean it's historic. It's the first time I've ever seen a military, to include the U.S. military, issue out their grid reference guide, and basically the way the military controls its forces to the civilian population in order to communicate communicate with all parties, and to include Hamas will get the communication of it. Oh, this is the zone, the very specific area in which we'll be conducting combat operations, or telling civilians to move to a different quadrant. It's a very, very common urban warfare methodology to control military formations and to report enemy activity, all this stuff. The fact that they shared it with the which is another step to go above and beyond with the constant care of to prevent civilian harm. It's I think it's historic, even as a scholar of urban warfare, to issue that level of a grid reference guide, something that the enemy could use as well, but you do it in order to save civilian lives, and they got to get credit for doing that 100%.
Thank you.
Go
So I
ahead,
think,
Sal.
yeah, sorry, the last piece of that I was going to
Go
finish
ahead,
up is I
Alex.
think John was right. Is there'll be an increased risk to the ground forces for that reason because, like you said, they're going to have more limited use of air. But that's the reality of the situation. I think there's also an increased risk to the ground forces because Hamas has had days off where they were able to stage whatever defensive positions they've taken. But to John's point that we've had in previous discussions, Hamas hasn't put up a significant resistance to date. Like we haven't seen a really huge response from them. That quite frankly, I was wrong. I was expecting more from them at this point. Which then begs the question: are they holding back in reserve? Is there something else going to come? I think the general impression that John stated in the past is that if they were going to do that, it would have happened already. Does it run the risk? Yeah, maybe. But we also saw that a number of the Israeli troops on the ground that have been killed so far were also killed as a result of improvised explosive devices that were put in entranceways or buildings or whatnot as Hamas fighters were withdrawing from their positions. So they've had days in underground areas to be able to potentially rig things like that. So the IDF did have to accept a potential increased risk to the ground soldiers who are going to have to go fight to be able to bring back civilian hostages into Israel. And so that was a decision that had to be weighed by Israeli military leadership, who at the end of the day said, hey, we're willing to accept the increased risk and potential casualties of soldiers if that means bringing back civilians alive. And that should tell you something.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I'm going to jump in here real quick. Hi, Alex.
Yeah, hi.
We saw yesterday some footage and the day before of Hamas going and digging out during this temporary ceasefire some of their people from the tunnels. Did you see that imagery, that footage?
I didn't see the specific one you're talking about, but I makes sense, though. I know the tunnel system enough from visuals to grasp what you're talking about.
Yeah, they were trying to do a quick exercise in that. And then there seems to be a ramping up and a concern just based on recent talking points out of Israel's intelligence sector regarding Hezbollah increasing and Iran trying to make another move. Just wanted to see the likelihood of that as they moved more
Sure.
into in the southern area.
Well, I mean, I'll give you my thoughts based on what I see, and then I'll give you personal opinion based on that. I want to separate the two. So, by all accounts from reporting that's come out, Hamas got their ass handed to them verbally behind closed doors by both Iran and Hezbollah for not having enough of a heads up about this, that it was going to take place at this time. And it put them on the back. They were backpedaling. So Hezbollah had to scramble to get fighters to the border, and then Iran was aggravated because they were basically being called out to help and they weren't doing anything. It made them look bad, but they weren't given a heads up about what took place. Now, whether that's an excuse not to get involved or they actually didn't want to is a different story. Lebanon's extremely broke right now. They cannot afford another war right now, just given the situation on the ground. It's not something the people in Lebanon want. And Hezbollah is a very disciplined force. People like to talk. People will talk about different groups and ascribe different levels of sophistication. Hezbollah, they're members. There are members of the government and members of parliament in Lebanon from Hezbollah, from the political organization. They administer a large portion of southern Lebanon. They have a disciplined, large, militant paramilitary force that operates in the south there, that are not like a bunch of undisciplined cowboys. So if they were going to attack, it would be big. They do have a significant arsenal of 150,000 rockets and missiles, with a vast majority capable of striking Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, which would be, very problematic, for air defenses to be able to shoot that many down. And the cost of that is somewhere like $30 to $40 billion or something in air defense. It's insane. Um, there's Early on, we had discussions where it was the Israeli cabinet debating whether or not to hit as Hezbollah and do that up north in a preemptive strike. And should they, would they, why would they not? There's a couple of things to point out there. a boatload of Israelis in the north have still been displaced because there is still a threat from Hezbollah in the north. They can't return to their homes. Uh, Hezbollah is the largest Iranian proxy in the region that is the most well armed. And separate from this situation, we still have an unresolved Iranian nuclear program issue that is still simmering in the background, no matter what happens in Gaza, one way or the other. If Iran were to expend all of those munitions now in Hezbollah's capabilities, and Hamas is getting their asses handed to them, the only thing you really have left at that point are the popular mobilization forces in Iraq and those that are operating in Syria that are attacking U.S. bases that don't have the level of sophistication or the weaponry to really impact or hit Israel. So if Iran were to be hit in a retaliatory strike, or if their nuclear program were to be hit and they wanted to respond, if they didn't have any proxies that were armed or left, they would essentially have to be forced to take direct action. And the entire purpose for building these proxy forces is that they can conduct these types of operations with a degree of plausible deniability and say that it wasn't us, which is another problem that needs to be addressed after this, because it's not just Iran that's doing that. It's also Russia through Wagner Group, right? And look at what they're doing in Africa and other places. Oh, it's not us, it's the private militia, but you're paying them and directing them what to do. Now, in the cases of that's the other thing. Everybody just takes a step back and views the conflict as a whole right now. You have the Houthi rebels that control a good portion of Yemen, with all the years of proxy fighting between them being backed by the Iranians and then the Saudis backing, that was the legitimate government of Yemen, right? So you have the Houthis who have been firing ballistic missiles and drones trying to strike Israel. You have Hezbollah to the north, which has been firing rockets down south, and there's been skirmishes and fire across the border. You have Hamas fighting or trying to defend Gaza against the incursion to try to demilitarize them, and also firing rockets at civilians inside of Israel. Then you have militias, Iranian-backed militias in Syria, who are the ones that are helping to attack U.S. bases inside of Syria, the gas fields, etc. And then in Iraq, you have the Popular Mobilization Forces, which are the Iranian-backed militias, some of whom I fought on the ground in 2008. They're still in existence, so that's why you look at counterterrorism. It's like gopher bopping. You can't actually kill an ideology. Every single one of those actors that I just firing at Israel and who are firing at U.S. bases are all armed, funded, trained, and directed to one degree or another by Iran. They are the ones who are behind each one of these groups. Now, that doesn't mean each one doesn't have their own individual aims and pursuits and political objectives, whether it's the creation of a Palestinian state or the destruction of Israel or the end of Sunni militancy in Iraq and defending the Iraqi government or whatever it is. Those are all just what it is they're after. At the end of the day, these are proxy forces that Iran has built up specifically for the purpose of being able to engage in those types of activities without having to get their hands dirty. And
Can I jump
yeah,
in here 1 second? So we have intelligence since the beginning. I started this spaces on October 7th that Russia moved their satellites over Gaza 24 to 48 hours prior to the attack and moved some assets out of the area. Well, a submarine apparently out of the area. Um, the question I have is based on the most recent leaks that are happening from Caroline Glick. I don't know if you saw that info and her write up in JNS. Um, there was intelligence that had suggested something like this was possible, but obviously this tsunami form of attack that we've now coined it. Um, well, they just failed to have imagination of what uh, Hamas would have done, even though there was training like this and videos being displayed out of North Korea with them practicing the exact same tactics and training perhaps Al Qaeda. I'm not sure to get a confirmation on that. So that being said, I failed to believe their sentiments that they were caught, you know, caught off guard. Iran or others, even Hezbollah, they must have known. You could, especially if they have satellite footage there, that communication through different intel or through their own spy channels would have been prevalent to them.
entirely
Especially since
possible.
of the anniversary, et cetera, et cetera. They picked multiple things that happened in those first 3 days are, dates and numbers,
Sure.
that they're, obsessed with. So yeah.
Entirely possible. I've heard some of the same things as well. The only stuff I saw coming back that I trusted for sourcing for U.S. government that was public was that supposedly the Iranians were surprised, and some of the others. Now, I think there's obviously people who knew that there was probably an attack coming. They provided money, funding, and training in general terms. But if we think about the secrecy, and yes, everybody heard about the 60-page report. Apparently, that was found. It was dismissed for the plan that this was aspirational, that Hamas couldn't actually do this. and wherever it ended up in the Israeli chain of command kind of dismissed it about a year ago. That report broke in the New York Times yesterday, right? That's about the plan that's on paper. Let's talk about what happened for a second if we're going to talk about intelligence failures. 2,500 Hamas fighters crossed the border into Gaza. They were supported by rockets that were flying, which means rocket teams were involved. That means there were logistics people involved, and there was a command and control element. You're talking about somewhere around, at a minimum, 3,000 people who were directly or indirectly involved. There would have been training, there would have been purchases, there would have been money movements, there would have been communication. And all of those people have friends and they have family members. And oh, by the way, if anybody's ever been involved or dealt with classified information, whenever I meet the conspiracy theorist whack jobs, I like to remind them that we can't keep a secret to save our lives because everybody's got a big friggin' mouth and it ends up on the front page of the New York Times. Somehow, all of that was missed. No one caught on to what was going on. I still don't know how, from a human intelligence perspective. We'll talk about that in a second. From a signals intelligence perspective, what came out in previous reporting is that they ran hard telephone wires through the tunnels. There were no cell phone signals to interrupt because it was hard lines. The other piece that came up is that the intelligence apparatus that was focused on listening to and collecting radio communications in Gaza between militants was repurposed or was disbanded or moved, and that a lot of the intelligence focus was up north on Hezbollah, which would make sense if you had complacency and believed that Hamas really wasn't going to do this or didn't have the capability, and that the billion-dollar security fence and soldiers around the perimeter would keep Israel safe from that threat coming out of Gaza. And if you believed that the existential threat to Israel and the next potential major conflict would actually come from state sponsorship of terror or a direct response from Iran, if Israel had to strike Iran's nuclear program if they went too far, along with the U.S., especially because even the folks involved in the negotiations now, if you were the furthest to the left on this issue in terms of being, uh, generous with Iran in terms on the agreement versus, more conservative on it, where you want to give them nothing, there's virtually no one left in the community from left to right who believes that a deal can be resurrected. And so that there is a real risk of having to potentially take action down the road related to that nuke program. And then what would happen? Hezbollah would be activated to then strike Israel in response if they hit the Iranian sites, and potentially responses directly from Iran and then Yemen. And they sort of alluded to that as much early on. If we get hit, this is how we're going to respond. So if you think that that's your greatest threat, right, and that's the adversary you need to worry about, that's where you're going to focus your collection capabilities, and you're going to focus the priority up on the northern border, and you're going to focus your collection on Hezbollah, and everybody takes their eyes off of Hamas, and lo and behold, we end up with October 7th.
So two things. Part of the surprise I felt that the response from Iran was the extent of the atrocities that they committed. I think that they overdid it, is the lack of a better word. So I perhaps think that that is part of the component. They were supposed to go to an Air Force base, and they got stuck in their bloodthirsty glory, rape and pillaging of pre-civilizational barbarism. Okay, that's one point. Uh, you know, I can't assume that they didn't know that there wasn't going to be an attack. Just like you said, because the amount of movement, I think there was more than 3,000 involved. But the initial training, wasn't there. It was off-site, is our understanding. That could explain some of that secrecy and the slow movement of materials into there. It could have started in 2006. I mean, they did say that this plan was ongoing for 2 years. The sophistication, though, and another guy who's one of our intel guys, Sin City, he'll say the same thing, that the level of sophistication doesn't show that Hamas was planning or plotting this, that this was a state actor. So, especially when you say running the lines through the tunnels and how they escalated their communication, and the fact that Sinwar was with some of the hostages at one point. I think you saw that report. Who knows, whatever he says is true or not. But
No, that came from that was confirmed by one of the hostages herself, who
yeah,
said, "Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" or something like that, and he didn't answer anything.
Stealth, are you walking around outside?
I am. I'm trying to take a walk. I only spend about 20 hours doing these spaces on Israel, or researching and trying to work
I was like, I
together.
hear a
I am
city
walking.
behind you. I'm like,
There's wind. There's wind beneath my wings. What can I tell you?
there's not that much wind. I was just like, I hear like city sounds. Like, what is happening right now?
Yeah. So Alex, thanks for that. I'm just curious,
No, I've got
how
the
this
same
has been
questions
all.
you do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm no fan of the Iranians. I spent 6 weeks block to block fighting in 2008. It's the third battle scene in American Sniper. Chris Kyle and a platoon from SEAL Team 3 were out there. I've seen, what they do and what they sponsor, how they operate. I'm not the only one who's on here. I can imagine in the space who's seen combat against a lot of the folks that we're talking about. Um, and the sophistication that I saw, the coordination, everything else. At first, I was like, this got to be the Iranians. They've got to be involved in this. I'm not 100% sure because, like, when I saw this here, there's a couple things that I've heard and read, and the extent they're true, we'll find out over time. But that there were like regular weekly drills in Gaza, where like these folks would show up, and it wasn't in mass, but like a platoon here would go train on this, they'd go train on that, and they get weapons training, movement training, this, that, the other thing, rocket training, glider training. But that nobody was told that there's going to be an attack on October 7th, and nobody was even told ahead of time what their targets were going to be. They were just training as a standing military force, paramilitary force would in basic soldier tactics and drills, as we would call it, or in their case, rape and pillage or whatever the hell else they were learning on the side. And I mean that seriously. I'm not making that as a joke or
I
whatever they
think
were
that was
teaching.
on the job training. I'm sorry
Yeah,
for lack of better words. But
yeah.
what other military or state actor handles compartmentalization like that?
Well,
Because
so
that
that's
type of
one.
and that leads to a different level of sophistication.
No, but that's right, and that's where I was going with that. Is so there was the compartmentalization piece, the ability to keep that secret, but that magnitude, that's okay. Was there state sponsorship and teaching tactics and techniques, or was there direct advice in how to do that with them? I don't know. But when you look at what actually took place, it was pretty simplistic in its nature. It was basically groups of what would be the equivalent of terrorist infantry with rifles and RPGs and grenades and handguns traveling in pickup trucks and being told, hey, you group of shitbags are going to go to this kibbutzim, you guys are going to go over to this place, and you're going to go kill all the civilians that are there. So it really didn't take much in terms of sophistication the morning of or command and control. You literally told them, this is where you're going to go, and this is who you're going to go kill. And they're going to be unarmed, and you're going to take your weapons, and you're going to go drive in a pickup truck, and you go shoot them. There was no aircraft, there was no armor, there was no artillery, there was no advanced technology, there was no big technical weapons, there was none of that wasn't there. This was
No,
basic.
but Alex, it was combined land, sea, and air. They tried. The one area that they failed in their initial assault was their seaborne assault. That completely failed. They had no success there.
Yes,
But they tried there. They started off with a coordinated assault on the sensor arrays at the fence, which were
yes,
tied to the automatic machine guns that were there. That were supposed to kind of mow them down without a lot of, because there was not a lot of soldiers at the border fence itself. That was for a
yeah,
variety of reasons. And then they knew exactly which kind of forward bases to go to, the observer bases, which bases that were handling all the signals that were coming in and the cameras
yeah.
and all that stuff. They went there. They went there first to take those people out. They see like it was a very well coordinated, even from like a I don't know. It was, imagine the equivalent of like 2,000 commandos in the U.S. Army doing a coordinated assault. That's a very I don't know. I haven't been in the military, but I've studied the stuff, and that seemed pretty damn well coordinated to me.
I mean, it's coordinated in the sense that yes, there was intelligence gathering that was done ahead of time for targets for where they were going to go to. Right, so obviously that had to be kept quiet. But asking people for information on a town or a village somewhere without telling them why you're collecting it doesn't leave you with a major OPSEC vulnerability because the person who's collecting it doesn't know why the hell they're being asked to do it or anything beyond that point. Hitting the cameras on the fences makes sense, but at the end of the day, other than those actions, I mean, it's not that complicated if you get your C group that's training to do seaborne assaults. I don't want to call them Navy SEAL equivalents because that's what he keeps calling them, but it's like watching a bunch of clowns, trying to do that. Because obviously they all died too in the process. They were terrible. It was one of the worst, like you said, the worst thing that they did was the maritime forces. The paragliders have been practicing sort of paragliding, and from what I was told and what I was read that morning, everybody started getting phone calls. It was basically like a mobilization, like a call up. Like, I mean, this is going to sound absurd, but when you've got like ready forces that are sitting there on bowstring to be called in the event of an emergency, that we've got a ready brigade of airborne troops at all times. We've got special operations forces on standby in the event we have counterterrorism problems worldwide. That basically their equivalent of those forces were activated that morning. They were called told to go to morning prayers if they hadn't already been. They showed up. They essentially mustered, and they were all told, "Hey, this is what you're doing today. You guys have all been trained on how to use machine guns and this, that, the other thing. You're going to go drive over to this place, right? And you have that, and then you have the paragliders who are basically tell you you're going to go glide over here, and then you have the folks who said, hey, you're going to go hit the beaches. Though there may have been a little bit more time that was necessary for maybe for the maritime or for the paragliders, but everything else in its nature was pretty simplistic. So the reason I'm saying this, I could go either way with this. I could clearly see a case where Iran had a direct hand in helping to guide in the sophistication, But I can also see that in an environment where there was some complacency and false sense of security behind $1 billion fence, where a group of folks were called up if it was actually planned in secret with hard telephone wires on the ground, and they were basically told to go. And in terms of like firm command and control, if you were just told, hey, go to this go kibbutz and go kill everybody, it's really simple directions, right? Like it doesn't require a sophisticated level of command and control to check in every 2 minutes and update your position and where's the adversary. No, go over there, and if you die in the process, who gives a shit? You're going to go be a martyr, and your job is to go kill as many people as possible. And the only command and control them is really the OPSEC up front, and then dispatching people to their locations. So I could see it going either direction or a combination thereof. I haven't made up a firm. It's got to be one or the other, because when I watched the film, that was the one thing that impacted me most. Is the attack resulted in so many casualties, but at its core, it was so simplistic in its execution. It wasn't very technologically advanced or major weapon systems. It was equivalent of terrorist infantry.
Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the New York Times article say that there was basically a full-scale dress rehearsal at some point last year that was
Yeah,
ignored?
there were rehearsals. They do a rehearsal, a major rehearsal, basically once a year, every year in Gaza. There's videos of it that are going on. Other people say, "Why the hell was that ever allowed?" There's videos of drills that take place from time to time of subgroups, nowhere near the size of 2,500, but large groups of folks. So yeah, there were trainings that were going on over the years, in recent years anyway. Whether that was clear enough as an indication that this was just an annual drill, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but maybe it's been the reserves, the National Guard. It almost sounds like every other week they show up for an hour on a Thursday to do drill, and then towards the end of the year they do a major exercise in Gaza, which sounds ridiculous, but I mean it literally sounds like how a reserve system operates.
It does sound like they're trying to do sort of like a National Guard kind of thing. I mean,
Right,
they are paramilitary militia.
right, precisely. But they're also not doing that full time. I mean, in terms of their responsibilities for a lot of these folks, right? They have other things that they're doing.
And Alex,
What about the
we were also told there was kind of like three waves of attackers, if you will. There was like sort of the first wave, which was, I guess,
right?
whatever you want to call it, their tier one forces, the most professional that they have, and then sort of a tier two that followed afterwards, and then sort of the civilians and enthusiasts who followed in sort of
Yeah,
the
the
third
shitbags
wave.
in the back.
Yeah, the shitbags in the back, maybe, and maybe the disproportionate share of rapes and dismemberment and
Sure.
torture and all that kind of stuff came from
Entirely
some of those
possible.
folks.
Entirely possible. I didn't see any of that on the film to be able to differentiate either in terms of them traveling in waves or differentiating between waves of folks leaving Gaza. And the problem is because they're not everybody doesn't wear the same uniform as a uniform force. It's hard to tell if the folks that were in all of the footage were part of that first wave you talked about. It was clear that there were some folks in there who were well dressed and who were obviously there, but some of them, I mean, if you've ever seen videos of like urban gangs like on social media, wherever else, you'll hear them yell out the gang name and they'll make some sort of symbol and they'll have an association. They were yelling out the names of the Customs Brigade while they were there, like Customs Brigade, like proud of their unit that they had done this. So it was clear they were present. What's not clear is who the hell everybody else was, if they were all part of it or if they were from different waves or different groups. It just wasn't clear from the video.
I
So,
just want.
Alex,
I
we
just
saw
can.
reports that there was Chechens. Well, we're listening to language. Chechens. There's some people that spoke Farsi. There was different actors over there. There's a Pakistani. There was a Lebanese guy. They identified, that was part of the initial wave. That seems like the original trained force versus the other
Possible.
ones that came in.
Yeah, it's possible. I didn't see any foreigners in the film, and foreigners, I mean, non-Palestinians that were amongst the
I'll send you
perpetrators.
some of that. I'll send you
No,
some of that on DM. Okay.
yeah, yeah, no, and I appreciate seeing it. I'm talking about literally I'm just addressing the film. That part wasn't in the film. They were all Palestinian men who were participating, who were wearing Hamas headbands, or they were wearing military style gear with
Yeah,
Palestinian flags on the chest.
exactly.
That's what we saw. I mean, Iris, I don't know if you saw anything different.
That's what I saw, and I saw the movie. Yep.
I see Lev's joining us. Hey, what's up, Lev?
What's up, brother? How are you?
Doing pretty good. Doing pretty good.
Yep. We're back on attack. Finally.
Does look like it. I just about to whoop some ass in Gaza.
If I could just hit that for a minute, because I think it's actually a point as an American who's listening to folks who are on there. For people who aren't familiar, haven't been watching the polling, or haven't been talking to Israelis and what it's done to their psyche and everything that's out there, like 90% of the populace is in favor of the eradication of Hamas, and 90% of the people want the hostages back. There is no real large movement of folks who are like, hey, we shouldn't go into Gaza and go finish the job when it comes to Hamas. So the exchange you just heard and everything that's going on is pretty reflective of the attitude and thoughts and feelings inside of Israel right now.
Yeah, 100%.
That's what they say. Like they're like, if Netanyahu made peace with Hamas, everyone pretty much bipartisanly in Israel says that they would drag him into the street and kill him like Gaddafi. He'd have to go hide in Gaza. That's one of the consensus people are saying.
I got the Mussolini reference in that analogy too, but that's not the first time I've heard that. Yeah.
Well, you talk to a lot of Israelis from both the left and the right. They would be pissed if they made peace with Hamas.
Yeah, there's no appetite for support for that anywhere on the political spectrum in Israel whatsoever. I mean, I've seen, and this is a lot of this is domestic Israeli politics. I'll reiterate what I've been told and what I've seen and heard, and then I'll leave it to those who are on to correct me if I'm wrong in what I'm saying here. But what I'm told, I mean, Netanyahu has obviously been held responsible by polling wise by the people in the country when you see the numbers come back. And normally in these types of situations, everybody rallies around the flag, so to speak, right? Like post 9/11, everybody rallied around President Bush, whether you liked him or hated him, and right afterwards. And obviously, then the world's opinion started to change, especially after the invasion of Iraq in 2003, over those weapons of mass destruction. I spent 2 years of my life there, so let's not even go there. I'm not going to turn this into a bitching session. But that rallying around the flag concept is usually there. It's not the case right now in Israel, right? Like they're the Prime Minister Netanyahu's poll numbers are atrocious right now. And if there was an election, then I think his party would lose about half the seats, if I'm not mistaken, from what I saw there. But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden, because the conservative government that's in right now is not in favor, that all of a sudden there's going to be a swing over to the left in Israel. The Israeli left is not seeing some sort of surge politically. It's Benny Gantz's party that really is the one who's going to see the largest gain in seats if there's an election in the near term, and likely the next prime minister if that ends up being the case. But I'll defer to any of the Israelis here who understand the domestic politics better than I do if I've misspoken.
And then the Biden administration is having discussion with Yair Lapid, who has no actual connection to the political establishment of Israel right now.
That's probably why they talk to him. It
At the
makes sense
moment.
because government.
Yeah, definitely. What we're seeing is what you just said, and we're gonna see how, the moment there's the war cabinet with Gantz, Netanyahu, and Eisenkot, and but the polls and the servers are showing a completely different. If the elections would be, today, so everything is changing. Bennett is coming back to the equation with 17 mandates, and Gantz, of course, is getting most of the mandates. So yeah, we're gonna see what's gonna happen, but we
I
need
mean, there
to.
is. It's an interesting. There is a rallying around the flag. There's a rallying around the military. There's a rallying around sort of
Yes,
national unity,
yes,
and they're kind of ignoring their politicians for right now. They're just like, get the job done, and then we'll take care of you one
right,
way or the other later, sort of thing.
right, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a unique form of rallying around the flag. It could be. Listen, we'll see. Bibi's the ultimate survivor in Israeli politics, but it could be that he's been around for so darn long, and mostly had a very successful, with this obviously very big exception, had a very successful tenure as prime minister, both in security and economic reforms, and foreign relations deals with the Arab countries, etc.
He just made the largest sale of military equipment to
Exactly,
Europe ever
exactly,
and to
exactly.
Finland. Let's not bypass that.
No,
And in
exactly,
addition, there's a ton of military tech that Israel is about to be ready to sell, et cetera, et cetera. And he has great relationships in Europe. So
correct.
people need to take a full look at the picture and not look at the myopic standpoint. I think there's other
Right.
components to what's going to happen of who's really responsible for what's
What
been going
was
on.
the weapon that they use?
No, they're all responsible. So
They shoot.
everybody will have to take responsibility at the end of the day, and there'll be after the war there'll be a big, big investigation into that, and we'll see. We'll see what happens because Israelis want answers. They want to know what was going on. And the last week's report regarding certain incidents that were talked about in the media regarding the army. So yeah, things will have to be checked out.
And
That's for
there's a
sure.
force multiplier of Turkey. So this deal with regarding the gas lines that Netanyahu pushed back on, and did not want to go solely through Turkey, and other people that were prior in government did, could be a major issue, because he is seeing that Turkey is not a good faith actor, to not be fully trusted. And by splitting up that gas line between Cyprus and Greece, it is an advantage to Israel. And he's the only one pushing for that and dug his heels in. Whereas prior people that we've just mentioned were about to sell themselves out to Turkey alone, which is a very dangerous option considering his response since then, and him asking the Holy See to become the protectorate of Jerusalem and to rebuild Gaza. Please. I mean, the man is on his last leg. So,
Thank you. Sorry, guys. I actually have to run. I can stay for like another minute if there's like one
Hey,
more question.
hey,
Otherwise, I've got
Alex
to
and
bounce.
Nico here. Sean, is it okay if I ask Alex a question?
Interview, Nico.
Thanks, bud. What's up, everybody, top to bottom? Alex, first of all, thank you for your service. Okay. My question to you is, as an Iranian American, okay, actually, two questions, if you don't mind. We've seen footage of paragliding training activity in eastern Iran a few weeks ago, probably a month ago, I would say, in Telegram, videos. What's your thought on that?
You mean the training taking place inside of Iran, like training these militant
Yes,
groups?
sir, around eastern Iran. Yes, and when I say Iran, I want to be clear: the
You mean the
Islamic
regime?
regime.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, there's a significant difference between the people of Iran, and a good vast majority don't support the government's policies, let alone its actions, and that's crystal clear to me. So I want to make sure that you understand. I know what you mean there, and so when we're saying Iran here, we're talking about the Iranian regime. Um, it's not unsurprising because they've been providing material support, to these terrorist groups and insurgent groups across the Middle East now for quite some time. And part of the reason that this is a problem is that they've been allowed to operate largely with impunity. Israel has hit back, when it relates to some of the nuclear scientists and programs, and they've hit the stockpiles in Syria and the airports when they're trying to smuggle weapons into Hezbollah and everybody else. But to a large extent, these groups have been allowed to operate with impunity across the Middle East. There was a proxy war for God knows how long in Yemen, going back between the Houthis and the government, right? The Iraqi militias were fighting, the Iranian-backed militias were fighting us, meaning the U.S. at first. Iran brought in Ali Musa Dakduk, who was a founding member of Hezbollah. I used to sit across the table from him in Baghdad while he was imprisoned in 2010. And his job was to help try to stand up Shia militias in Iraq to fight us. So there was a direct ask via Hezbollah as a proxy force to come do that in Iraq. And then there were also, militants who started groups like the Kazili brothers, Kais and Laith Kazili, and there were a few others forming groups like Asab al Haq. Then you had Muqtada al Sadr's Jaish al Mahdi that he stood up as another organization. Then the U.S. left. Those groups were then. I mean, this is where it kind of gets a little screwy. So with the rise of ISIS inside of Iraq, right? You had Saddam, who was representing a 60% Sunni majority oppressing, excuse me, a 40% Sunni minority oppressing a 60% Shia majority in Iraq. That got flipped on its head when we had a democratic election there, right? So now you've got Shia control of foreign policy and control of the government in Iraq. So those militias were then used as a ground force to augment the Iraqi army to fight ISIS, which the U.S. also supported. Even though we weren't supporting those militias, we were all sort of on the same weird side in the sense that we were going after ISIS and defending the Iraqi government. You go next door into Syria, where you've got Bashar al-Assad, who is a 10% Alawite Shia Muslim ruling over a 90% majority as a dictator. And then you have the Kurds there, the YPG as the large portion of the ground force and the Free Syrian Army, um, who were opposed to both Assad and also opposed to ISIS. So they were enemies of both. And then they're also considered a terrorist organization by our NATO ally next door, Turkey. So you have the U.S. and everybody going after ISIS. Then you have the proxy forces defending Assad, who used chemical weapons on his own people at the same time that the Kurds in the U.S. don't like him. And there's fighting going on there. You have the presence of the Russians. And then you've got the Kurds attacking our proxy ground force on the ground in Syria, who was the main force leading the counter-ISIS fight. So in one country, next door in Iraq, everybody's on a very similar page. You take that next door in a separate geopolitical context with additional puzzle pieces, and all of a sudden it's a shit mess. But Assad retained power there. And then next door in southern Lebanon, you have Hezbollah in control of southern Lebanon. So if you look at it from a geographic standpoint, from Tehran, next door to Baghdad, next door to Damascus, and then next door to southern Lebanon to the Mediterranean Sea, you have the Shia Crescent, where you have the Iranians in control of foreign policy and policy to a certain extent in most of those places if they put their foot down. Then you also have the Houthis down in Yemen. So there has been a crescent and there's been a buildup of resistance movement, as they call it, for the last couple of decades. And we've had hot fighting in Iraq and in Yemen and other places, but they've largely been allowed to get away with what they're doing. And as a result, deterrence has been eroded. And until it's reestablished, they're going to continue to use proxy forces so long as we let them get away with it.
Thanks, Alex. And the follow-up question I have, okay, as far as long-term solution for the Islamic Republic, what do you think should be, and also short-term solution? Thank you.
So I think the long-term solution is a democratic government that represents the will of the Iranian people, and whatever it is that they choose is something that should be respected, provided it's not a security threat to someone else, right? Which I believe the vast majority of the Iranian people want a peaceful country. It's a beautiful country with beautiful people who have a proud history of scientific achievement and all kinds of other wonderful things. That's currently just being ruled by, the Vilayat Faqih cannot stay. I don't think it's a viable government in the long term the way that it's been set up. Whether it ends up being a total secular state or some combination thereof is yet to be seen. And I think that would be, beneficial for the Iranian people because they should be able to live in a country where they get to choose who's in charge of them, and people need to respect whatever that decision ends up being. But we know we're not seeing free and fair elections that are there. Now, that doesn't mean we should be going to advocate for regime change at the hands of force, right? But to the extent that we can be providing support to political movements, independence movements, opposition movements to eventually lead to a democratically elected government when everybody's finally able to and be done with this current regime, I think we should. I am cautious, having been to war myself a few times, and don't support these outlandish statements that we should be simply going to overthrow governments like in Tehran with no plan afterwards. It was a shit mess when it happened in Baghdad. And in the U.S., from a political perspective, President Bush was taken to the cleaners for that, for not having a post-governance plan in Iraq, and then ended up ending that counterinsurgency fight. And then after we went through 4 years of campaigning about why he was so dumb for doing that, the next thing we know, we turn around and all of a sudden Muammar Gaddafi's overthrown in Libya, and we've got religious militants running around all over the country with terrorist organizations, in control of swaths of the country, even though we had the hindsight or the benefit of hindsight being 2020 after seeing the Iraq experience. So I think when we saw what happened in Syria, I think when we saw what happened in Libya, after we saw the shit mess that we had in Iraq after that, I think that's the point where Dennis McDonough, who was President Obama's chief of staff, turned around at him after they crossed that red line, and he used chemical weapons against his own people, and we were supposed to respond militarily based on the red line President Obama drew. There's a famous instant where Dennis McDonough, who's now the Veterans Affairs Secretary, was the chief of staff, took a walk with the president outside at the time at the White House and basically said, hey, this is not your legacy. And oh, by the way, do we really want to be using force here? And we didn't. And he stayed in power. And I think that, not that they were going to overthrow him anyway, we really didn't do anything meaningful in response to that. And I think that was an emboldening moment for folks. But it was also the point where we got to an unspoken policy in the United States that then continued to the next administration. Think about it for a minute. We have always supported democratizing movements or democracy movements worldwide when we can, and we've always, tried to support those people fighting for their independence and democracy, where they're able to, and we're also defending the innocent and whatever else. I mean, there's times we didn't. President Bush talks about the conflict in Darfur and others as being amongst the big mistakes that he believes that he didn't get involved in, and those things sort of happen. So it's not a perfect record by any means, I won't suggest, but at least there was sort of a consistent policy that changed, right? There was a conscious decision that was made not to overthrow Bashir al-Assad. President Obama made that decision while he was in. They weren't going to go after him. They left him there, and it was almost like a tacit admission that it's almost better to leave the folks that that you have, the devil you know versus the devil you don't, and that the militant whack jobs who would be the threat to the U.S. and the West are also a threat to Assad. And so, as long as he's in power or someone like him, he'll be suppressing the threat from those militants the same way that we would if he was there. He's just not allowing for a democratic movement. Same thing could be said for Saddam and also for Gaddafi. They also suppressed to a certain extent those terrorist, homegrown potential terrorist threats to their regime because they're strongmen who only survive based on power, and if the power comes from their ability to be there, right, and hold the office, that goes away when you overthrow. And also in these cases, there also isn't I mean, the reason there was a problem in Syria with the whole Free Syrian Army and the concept that maybe the country of Syria be freed from Assad's grip. When you have that type of control, you don't allow your opposition politically, or if it's based on demographics of some kind, religion, ethnicity, whatever, to take senior positions in the opposition or in governments that they have experience in governance or whatever else. There is no government in waiting in Syria. There is no government in waiting in many of these other countries that we're talking about here. And so a conscious decision was made that unless we're willing to commit the time and resources to go in, provide security, and do the nation and state building that would be required if you overthrow a government, then you don't do that. And so it seems as though we have made a policy shift in the U.S. towards that, even though it went unspoken, that was continued through the Trump administration.
Thanks,
Alex, you
Alex.
want to?
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And the reason I asked you those two questions, as an Iranian American, we support Israel 1,000%. We support the Jews 1,000%. We have history with them. We want to get rid of the terrorist Islamic Mullah regime, and we are all active in these spaces. And we appreciate people like you for having, good conversation, and also we're learning from people like you, because, as you know, it's important to have unity and help each other and learn from each other. Thank you.
Alex,
You too. Appreciate it. Yep, Jake.
Alex,
Alexa,
can
Alexa,
I
let's
just
go.
ask Alex
Yeah,
something to all of you ask?
sure.
I just want to ask him. Alex, what's your aim in doing this space, and what's your aim in doing this space? I think it's tomorrow now. What's important for you to bring to it, and why did you decide to talk about what you saw?
So there's been a dearth of information, and there has been accusations about disinformation back and forth. And the purpose for viewing the film unedited, without editorializing, was to see what actually transpired that day. Ethnically, I'm Greek and Italian. I'm Catholic. I have Holocaust survivors on my stepfather's side of the family, but I'm not Arab. I'm not Israeli. I'm not Jewish. I'm not Muslim.
Hmm.
So for those who try to frame this in a religious or ethnic conflict, I don't have a dog in that fight. That's not me from my background. So I'm trying to do both here now and after seeing it yesterday, and just as I said, I will tell you what I saw, and what I didn't see, is to try to bring as accurate a description and picture as to what transpired until such a time as that entire video will be released, and also to let you know, based on what I just described, when all you gave me the thumbs up before, because you guys have seen a lot of this footage, how many of you have seen the footage from the bar at the festival where there's like 50 dead people on the ground inside the bar area? How many of you have seen the images or the videos of the fields in which there's hundreds of dead people in the fields? Or when people are approaching a checkpoint with their vehicles and people are being shot through the windshields from a distance where you don't even know who's inside, whether they're Arab, Israeli, Jewish, Muslim, whatever. You're all giving those because you've seen them. Those are all part of the film. They're out there on Telegram. This is not made up crap that's out there. This actually happened. Never forget, never again requires two things. In this particular case, it requires action against Hamas, and it also means that you cannot let people forget about what happened, and you have to bear witness to the truth. And if you do, you have an obligation to make sure others know about it.
Alex, make sure you push back or prepare to push back on the claim that all the people at the music festival were killed by a crazed Apache helicopter pilot.
So, based on the condition of the bodies that are visible in all of those videos, the Apache helicopters have a giant Gatling gun with very big ammunition that goes with that, or rockets and missiles. If they were being killed by Apache gunships, they would be blown to pieces and have giant holes in them. You don't see that in the video. So that's horseshit.
can I ask you a final question, Alex? It might be too long. You can say you can't do it right now. We'll do it later. But it's a question about Lebanon specifically. Are you have you been following the negotiations that have been happening between all the parties in Lebanon, specifically with Le Drian and the French administration, which is pushed
Yes,
by the
but not
American?
to the level of depth that I think I should. But on a peripheral, yes.
Okay, what do you think about that pressure that's being put in place to re-implement the resolution of 1701, UN Resolution 1701?
I mean, there's a couple of problems. There's the ongoing conflict, and then there's the socioeconomic status or issues that you're seeing inside of Lebanon as a result of the economy in terms of what people are willing to adopt or not. And as it relates back to governance in the mix, there's so many factors at play there. I don't know where that will go. To be honest with you, I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. Just
I
wanted to.
actually had Alex. I know you got to go. So I had actually one more quick Lebanon,
Sure, sure.
not about the political, but about the military situation. I'm seeing reports increasingly that um, Hezbollah Hezbollah past the Litani River towards the Israeli border, that their sort of infrastructure has taken quite a hit. Obviously they're still an intact force, very much so. Don't get me wrong, but that they've taken more of a hit in these skirmishes, quote unquote skirmishes. They've taken quite a hit, especially in sort of their infrastructure, their arms depots, and they've lost, dozens of some of their sort of top line fighters of the Radwan force. What are you seeing about the damage that's been inflicted on them, sort of in the Israeli border region?
So, I mean, we've seen the pot shots going back and forth, the security cameras, the towers, the antennas, some of the border checkpoints. You've got little sniper nests set up here, there, and some of those folks are dying or being hit. You haven't seen really wholesale damage or destruction along the area there. And I think I stopped halfway through my ramble earlier about that related to Lebanon and the destruction. There is a real case to be made inside of Israel that at some point Hezbollah is going to have to be dealt with. And do you do it ahead of time with a preemptive strike in the hopes that you can take out a significant number of those rockets where it reduces the amount that you have to, or reduces the strain on your air defense systems, right? And do you do that? Or do you sit back and wait for the next attack to happen? We haven't seen a large degradation of the capabilities inside of Lebanon yet. I don't think, nobody wants to see another front opened up. I don't think the Israelis want to, but at the same time, they're also recognizing that there's a long-term, real threat from Hezbollah that is posed to the populace, and I think there's still debate as to what the hell to do about it and when.
Thank you for the answer before.
Maybe I can respond to that. The damage is not significant yet. Like even in Lebanon politically, you don't see weakness from Hezbollah, which proves that it's not significant yet. Usually when they are significantly hit, like after the Beirut explosion, they came out and started talking. They started asking for help. They started discussing. Right now, there is no discussion with Hezbollah.
Yeah, no,
I'm
no, don't get me wrong.
left.
It's not like I was under no impression that they're like on the verge of collapse or anything close to that. Of course, but just I was speaking about specifically close to the Israeli border. It seems like I read a figure that Israel's dropped 6 times the ordnance that Hezbollah has. Again, all of it's been confined within a few kilometers of the border on both sides, for the most part, and that they've taken out more than you would think, just in terms of sort of the immediate border force, I guess, from Hezbollah. That's what I was referring to, not their overall kind of obviously their missile strength has not been significantly affected, etc. But they've lost and estimates are as high as 200 fighters. And lots of arms depots, observation towers. I'm just talking about the immediate border area or concentration of infrastructure and forces. That's kind of what I was referring to.
Yes, that's something Nasrallah talked about in his second speech when he talked specifically about how they were not expecting those new drones, where every time there is an attack or there is any movement on the border, they would get shot, which is increasing the amount of deaths. So he did allude to it. He did say that they are surprised by that. And yes, it's something surprising to have so many deaths in such a small period without an actual war or an actual fight. Like usually what you see is like you see a couple of people shoot right, shoot left. If one person dies here, one person dies there, and that's it. Here it's more significant. Yes, I can agree with that.
Appreciate that, James.
All right. Let's see here. Got some requests.
Sean, I put in the bubble the purchases from Israel in terms of military reinforcements that came through. Colby posted. I wasn't sure if you guys discussed this already.
You can put anything you want in the nest, Stealth.
Okay, I put it up there. It shows a scoop from Defense News. Last month, Israel placed an FMS order for 75 JTLVs. Maybe you guys have discussed this already, from Oshkosh Defense. Ordered dozens more via direct commercial sales. The FMS contract was valued at $29 million. It was awarded yesterday. There's no congressional notification because it's under the 100 million threshold for defense articles sold to NATO plus 5. These contracts will keep Oshkosh's line open into 2025. It's expected to close down in 2024 due to AM General winning the contract for future JLTV production. So that's one post, and it goes into detail. And then the next post I posted in the bubble for you guys was also from Colby. U.S. has shipped Israel 57,155 millimeter shells, 15,000 bombs, including 5,400 plus 2,000 MK84s. Have you reviewed this? I just wasn't sure. Maybe somebody said it. 5,000 plus 500-pound MK82s. I'm not an expert in this, so if somebody else wants to read it, feel free. 1,250-pound GBU 39 SDBs,
So we did
102,000-pound.
kind of talk about that a little bit.
Oh, good.
We
Okay.
had basically those are like, I think those are
These
some
are
of
all
the high
direct
end bunker
purchase.
busters.
They paid for it. That's the net of it. They want everybody to know that Israel actually paid via direct commercial sales.
So they thought that they were so important that they paid for them directly.
People were trying to say that it's America is paying for all this. So there's like a negative narrative. So Colby made sure to list that this was direct commercial sales. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because people were upset that it wasn't going to Ukraine. If you look at the thread and the post underneath it. So, yeah.
Also, real interesting regarding, we were talking about the intelligence, potential intelligence failures or whatever. On our space yesterday, we were listening to a very interesting video. I think it was like a couple days ago, from Caroline Glick, who kind of went into detail, and she is calling for the resignation of two specific, because there's generally been a consensus in Israel that, like, we were talking about earlier, that any political or military leaders will deal with potential failures after the major conflict is concluded. So she was calling for the resignation of the head of military intelligence, and then she added the head of Southern Command, due to some of these, and her perceived intelligence failures. And she went into some very good detail. Not the conspiratorial stuff, not like, oh, they knew it and they wanted it. No, none of that stuff, but just like failures and arrogance and complacency and that sort of thing. So I would urge people, if they want to get sort of a interesting analysis and a lot of factual basis behind it, to watch that video on YouTube or other places from Caroline Glick.
Okay. Sounds like a good one. That was Caroline Glick was the one who also sort of was one of the first people to report sort of on Biden administration's moving their goalposts with Israel, right? Like in the background, trying to talk them out of actually continuing the war, right? That was Caroline Glick who broke that, and then Breitbart ran with it, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, she was talking about how basically the schizophrenia within the Biden administration, and how that it's one of the major factors that's preventing, or at least hindering, Israel from winning the war more quickly. But it's always hard. It's always hard to get into those kind of things in terms of politics, because despite it all, even in a Democratic administration, and even with kind of subversives within the ranks of the Biden administration, which there are, and Iran-friendly people and Hamas-friendly people, they're still obviously Israel's most important ally. So they kind of have to, to the extent possible, Israel's kind of got to somewhat, compromise with them in terms of tactics and strategy, while maintaining their overall goals. Both Bibi Netanyahu and Gallant and Gantz made it clear that their main goal of destroying Hamas will not be changed, and I think that's evident in sort of what's restarted today.
I think Sin is waiting. Sean.
Yeah, go ahead, Sid.
Yeah, sorry, I'm driving stealth. Could you tell me what the numbers you're reading off
Sure.
between the Mark? I'm only interested in the
Yes.
different. What's the Mark 84s and the Blue 109s? What's the quantity of
Sure.
each?
So 5,400 plus 2,000 pound MK84s, 5,000 plus 500 pound MK82s. Hold on, let me just do this for Sean really quick. Thank you, sweetheart. Hold on, let me put this here.